Welcome everyone, another great video. We're gonna have a fireside chat here
Yes, we are.
going over some common retirement pitfalls, a few retirement myths that we often see, provide a few tips on how you can tackle them. And the first one here, Kevin, longevity.
Yes, longevity. That's a big one that a lot of people don't plan for. Everybody comes in and says, I'll only live to 85. Nobody in my family's gotten that point. I'll be able to be happy if I've got 15 years worth of retirement income or anything else. You cannot expect that one. The way things have been going over the last century, people are living longer and longer all the time. You need to really plan for how long it may be. So, I mean, we always use a few standard numbers that we like to get in there, because if we don't do it that way, the last thing you want to do is outlive the money that you've had planned to live. And I mean, that's the biggest factor going forward. So make sure that that longevity with the financial plan is always made for a longer time period. Err on the side of caution rather than what you think is going to go on.
And it's tough, right? Because we think about tomorrow, we think about next week. Oh, the game's going to be in a few weeks, so we're making the playoffs in a month. At least that's what I think about.
That's it.
Regardless, though, it's hard to fathom a couple of decades out. But
That's
that is the usual retirement, kind of 2, maybe 3 decades. Hard to get a perspective on that. And if we don't have that worked into the plan, like Kevin said, you could run out of money. There's a few things that could happen. So to err on the side of caution, a quick tip that we use, we assume you're going to live a long, happy, healthy life. That's what we want.
Yes.
So we assume women live to 94, men live to 94, women live to 96. You might be thinking, well, that's probably longer than required, but that's the point. That's the goal. We don't want you to run out of money. So if we have that longer time frame, we're quite confident the plan will be fully funded. It can handle a little bit of variation along the way. So longevity, how do you handle it? You get conservative. You assume a longer lifetime. We use 94 and 96. That'd be a good way to make sure your projections are on track. Another one, and I was thinking of how can I say this in the most friendly way possible? Modern day dependence. I think that's a pretty good term.
It is. Basically, it's the kids are not leaving home. You can't get rid of them fast enough. And that's the biggest problem nowadays, right? It used to be back then, 18, sort of early 20s, out of the house. They're on their own, they're dealing with it. That's gone. Nowadays, with higher costs of living, with going to university and the cost of doing that, kids are staying longer and longer. They're getting into that sort of 25, maybe even 30 age category before they can go. Remember, housing right nowadays is an expensive endeavor to get into, and they may not be able to afford that. So staying with mom and dad might make it a little easier. So having those dependents, of course, if you haven't planned for this, well, then that's another expense that's going on. They're not cheap. Kids cost a lot to bring up, and it continue going forward if they're having to have their place paid for or whatever the case may be. So having those dependents, and that's just sort of the one side. I mean, you could also get into that grandkid scenario as well, where now you're supporting more than just one. Again, that's another topic that you need to really take a look at. It's something that you can plan for and can get around, as opposed to not dealing with it at all.
You have to think about it. It's really the key. You got to try to factor it into the budget, right? And for good reason, right? So you mentioned the housing factor. It's harder for folks to get set up on their own now because houses cost more, mortgages are more expensive. Also, the job market, a lot of jobs need post-secondary education of some type. Post-secondary is not cheap. So we see quite frequently that whether it's the parents, maybe it's the grandparents, they're helping out the kids and the grandkids, usually in one of those areas. Maybe it's helping out with education. Maybe they're living longer at home, so there's more budgeting items for the parents. Maybe the grandparents are helping out with the housing situation, helping them get a down payment for a new home regardless. Nothing wrong with any of that. It simply means it needs to be factored into the budget because those kind of unexpected costs or underestimated costs can derail a plan. So you need to make sure that's accounted for. So it's really being realistic with the budget that helps alleviate that particular expense.
And of course, you could also be in that sandwich generation as well, where not it's just your parents there, but you're looking after your parents maybe. Maybe somebody has to move at home, be with you because they can't be on their own anymore, or they're in a facility that maybe you're helping to pay for and get things along those lines. Things that need to be planned for going forward. Now, it doesn't necessarily happen to have happen for everyone, but it is something that maybe we should put into the budget just to consider.
Absolutely. And both of those are being under the dependent category there. Another common pitfall, something people might not consider, uncertain income source. Now, where we often run into this is a couple, but I think the main one is folks will say, you know what, I'm not worried about retirement. I enjoy what I do. I'm just going to keep working. I'll work until I'm 85 and then I'll pass away. I don't need to worry about having enough set aside.
I may not.
Yeah, you and I both.
Exactly.
But that's not an uncommon thought. No. The issue there is health can be a bit of an uncertainty. We don't know 20 years from now I'm going to be perfectly healthy. I hope I am. But that's not something we can necessarily control. So if you're planning to work the entirety of the retirement, and then you have a health issue and you can't work, well, hopefully you got something to rely on. That's where the plan comes in. And how do we handle that in the plan? Well, we have to pick a date. We just say, assume you're going to retire. We use 70. If you work beyond that because you're healthy and you enjoy it, phenomenal. But we want to make sure you got enough money so that at 70, you've got that option.
Yeah.
That's kind of how we handle that uncertainty of health if you intend to work the entire time.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the biggest factor you can't plan is your health. I mean,
Yeah.
you could be fine all these times, and all of a sudden you see people will have a heart attack or something comes along, an illness creeps up, and you had planned on working all that entire time. Well, maybe you can't do that anymore. And if that's part of your plan that I'm never going to leave, well, then you can't really count on that if you all of a sudden have to pull back. Now I'm not prepared for it. Now what am I going to do? Where's the money going to come from? So again, use that stipulated age. We like to use 70 as the age. Even if you want to work past that, then that all becomes excess that you can deal with from there. It's not necessary. We're not saying you have to stop at this time frame, but you should plan that, okay, let's say that I am done at 70. And then that way, at least I know what I have going forward is worthwhile.
Yeah, it gives you flexibility.
Exactly.
Personal example, my dad, he was an accountant, he's certainly retired now, but initially he was working part-time, and then there's some changes at the office he didn't really like, so he just said, hey, I'm done with this.
Yep.
I don't want to deal with it. I don't want the stress. I don't have to deal with it, so he simply retired. Not everyone's going to be in that situation, but if you have a plan and you have a date and you have some money set aside, you can give yourself that flexibility. Another thing you can't control the health necessarily. You can't control office dynamics.
No.
Maybe you love the job today, but 15 years from now, things are going to change and it won't be quite what you hope for. Well, how do you work around that? Again, you pick a date and you give yourself that financial flexibility. Another uncertainty, not necessarily with work, but inheritance.
That's a big one to deal with. I mean, a lot of people nowadays, depending on where you are, they're planning for that. Or they want to spend, they want to live the lifestyle now. They've grown up doing it. You know what? I'll spend my stuff. I'll do this. I'll do that. Retirement's so far off. I'm not even going to plan for it. And by the way, when my mom and my dad pass away, I'm going to collect this kind of money. Well, you can't prepare for that. Again, 20 years ago, you could plan for that 15, 20-year retirement. Now, 30 years plus is not out of the range for anybody.
That's more than normal.
Exactly. That costs more money nowadays to be able to do that. And with that, you're going to burn through a lot of these things. There's a lot of people nowadays also, housing market, they're downsizing. They're taking that money and they're going on vacations. They're going down south, whatever they can do. And it's spending what they've earned and to get to that point. So again, inheritance should not be part of your retirement plan. Don't say, well, I'm going to get 400 grand from my mom and dad as soon as I die. Well, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe all of a sudden something went wrong and the cats and dogs are going to get it for the Humane Society as a contribution. So inheritance is always one that is risky to try and plan. It's nice if it's there. And I would look at that as more of a exception as opposed to the main rule.
Yeah, and you hit it right on the head there. How do we handle that in a financial plan? What's our tip or solution for that category? We just don't include it.
Yep.
Ideally, unless the client really forces us to, we want to be conservative. We'll just take it out of the plan. So if it comes, fantastic. You got some extra, you can enjoy it, but you're not depending on it in order for your retirement to be a success. So that's how we handle it. We just simply take it out of the plan. That's the conservative assumption. We mentioned 4. If we didn't mention 4, we should. There's 4
of them.
We did 3. Let's get to number 4 here on the list. Common pitfalls. People might gloss over it. It's navigating healthcare in retirement. There's a few ways we can look at that.
Yeah, and I mean, the first one we should probably talk about is your health benefits. I mean, everybody plans what their expenses are, and they've got them routinely listed out, you know, cable, hydro, whatever the case may be. But everybody seems to forget that while you're at work, you're probably paying for a healthcare plan, and that healthcare plan comes right off your check. You never see it, so you don't plan for it. But when you retire, all of a sudden it's not there anymore. Maybe your company offers an extension, but if not, you should be looking for other things because you've always worried about that dental. Maybe my prescriptions are being fulfilled, and I've always got that covered. But if you don't look into it, then you're going to be in real trouble going forward because you now all of a sudden have to come up. I mean, we've done videos beforehand where we've shown almost $6,000 is the average you'll spend without a plan. So this is something that really you should have to take a look into, is making sure that you got those health benefits covered, whether it's health benefits for medical, whether it's for dental, or even if it's travel insurance, if you're going to be away. Those are all things that need to be covered.
Absolutely. And how do you handle that when it's planned? Well, usually it's earlier in the retirement stage where you do that kind of planning, typically before you're retired.
That's what the hope is.
You want to look at your options. Is there something through work to have to get a private policy? You kind of go through that before retirement and usually make a decision in the early stages of retirement. And then you got that factored in. You can add that to your budget because you have a better idea of what the expense will be. Another area in the healthcare field is the other end of the spectrum. Not early retirement, but the latter stages of retirement. It's the long-term care. Often we don't think about that too much. It's not as much fun to think about. It's the later stages of retirement, but it can get costly. If you do a private facility, well, big numbers. If you do a private facility, if you do a publicly funded facility, you still have to pay. And it'll vary province to province and depends on the income of the retiree. That part key, it's income. It's not their asset base. They could have a lot of money in the bank, but it's kind of the income in terms of the tax return that often determines the expense. But even on publicly funded components, it's still 20 to 30 grand.
It is.
That's common. That's a common expense that you could see as part of long-term care.
And I can speak from personal experience with my mom now being in a state where she has to be into a home. And me and my brother had to go looking through this, went through the entire system, both with the government and on the private side to see what options are there. And again, I mean, it's a matter of you have to do your due diligence. You have to start looking at this. And if you pre-plan ahead of time as to where you want to go or things along those lines, it makes it a lot easier as opposed to something's come up and now you have to scramble to it, because the healthcare industry for this is not always the easiest thing either. And Clint's right. The costs there based on income, but again, private compared to public has a huge difference in what the costs can be overall, and making sure that you maintain the facility that's going to give you the most for what you're dealing with. And that's a big factor. So plan this if you can. It's another one, like we say, you don't want to think about it, but it is a necessary evil. It must be dealt with.
Yeah, and kind of two ways we can handle that in a plan. I mean, we can't predict the future. We don't know exactly what it's going to be in 10, 20 years, but two ways you can handle it. So we can get insurance on this. Insurance companies will sell you insurance for lots of things, long-term care being one of them. You need to do that in advance. You want to do that when you're younger. You don't want to try to get that insurance at 82. You want to try to think about that in the younger years. And another way is frequently in a retirement plan, we might not use the residence. So if you actually own property, so it's not for everyone, but if you own property and you have no debt against that property, you probably take it out of the retirement portion of the plan. Have it in the plan, but we won't depend on it for retirement. So we've kind of got the equity of the house as kind of a cushion, meaning usually when you go to a long-term care facility, you'll sell the house. That means you have some cash, and that cash isn't needed for the actual retirement plan. So a little extra cash that could help for the long-term care needs. Everyone's different, but there's kind of two ways you can handle that as part of your retirement plan. The insurance, or really just have an asset or cash set aside that could be used for those purposes.
So again, just make sure that when you're doing your financial plan, you've thought of everything beyond it. And again, most times it's not just what you think immediately. There's yearly, there's occasional expenses that don't happen all the time. And these are some of the pitfalls we want you to avoid. There are videos we do have on this, aren't there, Clint?
Absolutely. Like this one, you're going to love the one on 4 signs to determine if your retirement plan is on track. That's probably floating on the screen somewhere. So click on that video. We'll see you again very soon.